She pushed her mother-in-law out into the freezing night because of one cruel reason. And what her husband did next will leave you speechless. Imagine discovering that someone you trusted to love and protect your family could turn so cold, so cruel. On a quiet November night, a son returning home early from a business trip stumbled upon a scene that no one should ever witness. A mother left shivering outside her own home, abandoned by the person she trusted most. What happened next would change their lives forever. Asterisk. Hello everyone, welcome to our story. Please don't forget to like and share and tell us in the comments where you are reading from. Asterisk. On a chilly Tuesday night in November, the streets lay empty under the soft glow of street lights, and the wind carried a quiet that only seemed to amplify the loneliness of the hour. David was driving home from a week-long business trip, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. 7 days away from his family had felt like an eternity, and he couldn't wait to see his wife Sarah and his mother Margaret. The clock on his dashboard read 11:45 p.m., and a small smile played on his lips as he imagined their surprised faces. When he walked through the door, he had returned earlier than expected, his meetings wrapping up sooner than planned. "They're going to be so happy to see me," he thought, glancing at the darkened streets, imagining the warm glow of home waiting for him. As he turned onto his quiet street, something caught his eye. At the end of the block, his house looked unusual. A shadow, small and hunched, sat on the front porch, barely moving in the cool November air. David slowed his car, squinting to get a better look. Who would be sitting outside at this hour? He murmured to himself. His pulse quickened, a strange knot of worry forming in his chest. Parking his car, he stepped out, the cold biting through his jacket, and approached the porch cautiously. The figure was an old woman, her thin clothes doing little to shield her from the cold. She trembled slightly, her frail frame curled over what looked like a small stool. "Mom?" David called softly, unsure if he wanted an answer, yet hoping desperately. The woman's head lifted slowly, and as the moonlight hit her pale face, David froze. It was Margaret, his mother. Her lips were tinged blue, and her grey hair stuck out in a chaotic halo. Tears welled in her eyes when she recognized him. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the night wind. David rushed to her side, kneeling to take her icy hands into his. "Mom, what are you doing out here? Where's Sarah? Why aren't you inside?" The shock of seeing his mother shivering in the cold made his heart pound. Margaret looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Shame and embarrassment etched deeply into her features. A single tear slid down her cheek. "Your wife." "She said I was." Smelling, Margaret murmured. Her voice trembled with sorrow. "She told me to sit outside until morning to get some fresh air." David felt the world tilt beneath him. "She made you sit outside? All night?" His voice rose, but he forced himself to stay calm for his mother's sake. Margaret nodded, avoiding his gaze. "I knocked gently. I didn't want to wake the neighbors. I didn't know what else to do." Her confession made David's chest tighten painfully. His mother, the woman who had worked tirelessly to raise him, was treated like an intruder in her own home. The night air felt even colder as David observed her thin nightgown, bare feet, and the wet slippers that did nothing to keep her warm. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just a moment of carelessness. It was cruelty disguised as something ordinary. He glanced at his watch. Past midnight. She had been outside for more than 3 hours. "Mom, how long have you been out here?" he asked gently. "Since about 9, Margaret said quietly, her voice almost drowned by the wind. "I was watching my evening television show when Sarah came home. She seemed angry about something. She said the house smelled terrible because of me, and told me to go outside for fresh air. When I asked when I could come back in, she said maybe in the morning when the smell was gone." David's hands clenched involuntarily. This was the woman who had made unimaginable sacrifices for him. She had worked long hours, gone hungry so he could eat, sold her only valuable land to ensure he could attend university. And now, here she was, treated as if she were nothing more than an annoyance. "Mom, let's get you inside right now," David said firmly. He helped her up, supporting her frail frame as she struggled to rise. Her legs were stiff from hours spent in the cold. Together, they walked to the front door where the porch light remained off, casting the entrance in shadow. David knocked loudly, calling out to Sarah. For a tense moment, there was silence. Then, faint footsteps echoed from inside the house, slow and reluctant, as if someone was begrudgingly answering the call. The locks turned, and the door opened to reveal Sarah. She looked beautiful in her silk nightgown, her hair perfectly styled and her posture relaxed. Her comfort contrasted sharply with the image of Margaret outside, shivering. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "David, you're home early?" she said, her voice a mixture of shock and irritation. David's voice was low, controlled, but carried an unmistakable edge of anger. "Why is my mother sitting outside in the cold?" Sarah forced a casual smile. "Oh, Margaret wanted some fresh air. You know how she likes to sit outside sometimes." David felt a surge of fury, tempered by the need to stay calm for his mother. "Mom, is that true?" Margaret shook her head slowly, tears welling again. "No, son. She said I was smelling up the house. She told me to go outside and stay there until morning." Sarah's face turned red as her lie was exposed. "That's not exactly what happened," she said quickly, trying to recover. "I thought some fresh air would be good for her. Old people need fresh air, right?" David helped his mother inside, ignoring Sarah's attempts at justification. He saw the living room clean, warm, and smelling faintly of expensive perfume. Nothing about the house suggested the discomfort Sarah had claimed. It was clear she had lied. He sat Margaret down, wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders. Slowly, warmth seeped into her cold body and her shivering began to subside. David knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Mom, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Has Sarah treated you like this before?" Margaret glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah lingered, then back at David. Her voice was barely audible. "This week, she stopped letting me eat with her. She gave me leftovers in my room. She said I embarrassed her in front of her friends. And she called me the housekeeper when they asked who I was." David's fists clenched in anger. Months of small humiliations, all hidden behind polite smiles, had come to light in one horrifying moment. He looked at Sarah, no longer seeing the woman he had married, but someone cruel and selfish. Sarah attempted to intervene with feigned care, offering water for Margaret. David's eyes locked on her, cold and unyielding. "Keep it? My mother doesn't need anything from you," he said, voice cutting. Sarah's fake smile vanished instantly. "You're not the woman I married," David said quietly, stepping closer. "You're not the woman I thought you were." Sarah laughed her mean, hollow sound. "Oh, please, David, you're overreacting. She's fine now. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," David said slowly, letting each word land like a hammer, "is that you treated my mother like trash. You locked her outside in freezing cold. You made her eat alone. You lied to everyone about who she is. You are cruel." Sarah, Margaret, still wrapped in the blanket, quietly sobbed. And for the first time, David fully realized the depth of his anger and disappointment not just at Sarah, but at the betrayal of trust in his own home. The warmth of the living room wrapped around Margaret, but it did little to soothe David's growing anger. He watched his mother as she tried to relax under the blanket, her eyes still glistening from tears. Sarah, standing stiffly in the kitchen, was clearly waiting for an opportunity to interject, but David's gaze pinned her in place. Every fiber of his being told him that he could no longer tolerate the lies, the cruelty, and the disrespect toward the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with full sweetness. "David, I was just trying to help. Fresh air is good for old people. You're making such a big deal out of nothing." David turned to her slowly, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Nothing. Mom was sitting outside in freezing cold for 3 hours because of you. That is not nothing. That is cruelty, Sarah. Pure and simple." Sarah rolled her eyes, attempting to dismiss the gravity of her actions. "You don't understand living with an old person every day." The smells, the weird habits, the way she moves around the house. It's disgusting. David felt a sharp sting in his chest. Disgusting? His mother, the woman who had given him everything, was disgusting. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out physically. Instead, he spoke slowly, each word measured. Those herbal creams she uses help her arthritis pain. Those spices she cooks with are from family recipes passed down for generations. And you called her disgusting? Sarah's expression hardened. I don't care about your family traditions. This is my house too, and I shouldn't have to live like this. David's anger, long simmering beneath the surface, now boiled over. Your house? This house exists because my mother sold her land to pay for my education. Because of her sacrifices, we have this home, this life. And you? He paused, his voice shaking with rage. You treated her like garbage? Sarah looked stunned, momentarily at a loss for words. David rarely spoke like this. Usually, he was calm, patient, always trying to maintain peace. But tonight, he was seeing her for who she truly was, and he could no longer restrain himself. I was just trying to help. Sarah repeated, desperation creeping into her voice. I didn't mean to. David stepped closer, his presence commanding and intimidating despite his average height. Help? By locking her outside? By making her eat alone? By calling her the housekeeper in front of your friends? That's not help, Sarah. That's cruelty. You want to know what's disgusting? Your heart. Your selfish, cruel heart. Sarah's mouth fell open, shock etched across her face. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm your wife, and I am your husband, David replied, his voice calm but deadly serious. And as your husband, I will not allow the woman who raised me to be treated like this in my home. You want to know whose side I'm on? The side of the woman who worked 3 jobs so I could go to school. The side of the woman who went hungry so I could eat. The side of the woman who sold her land to give me a future. That's whose side I'm on. Sarah tried to protest, but David's words had already shattered the facade she had maintained for so long. You want me to apologize? She asked, her voice faltering. I'll apologize. I'll say I'm sorry, Margaret. Isn't that enough? David shook his head slowly. It's too late for fake apologies. You showed me who you really are tonight, and now you must live with the consequences. Margaret, still seated on the couch, spoke softly but with unmistakable authority. I never asked for much, she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. I just wanted to live peacefully in my son's home. I wanted to help cook sometimes, to watch television with my family. I wanted to feel like I belonged. And yet, tonight, I was forced to sit outside in the cold, humiliated, frightened and alone. Sarah's eyes darted to the floor, shame beginning to replace anger. Margaret continued, recounting the sacrifices she had made, working tirelessly during the day and night, selling her wedding ring to pay for David's medicine when he was sick as a child, giving up her own needs so that he could live a better life, even selling her land to pay for his education. Each word, each story, revealed the depth of her love and devotion Sarah had failed to respect. David's heart ached as he listened. He glanced at Sarah, whose face now reflected the shame she had been trying to hide. But he knew that mere remorse was not enough. Her actions had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. David walked to the closet, pulling out a large suitcase and placing it on the floor with a resounding thud. Sarah's eyes widened. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. I'm asking you to pack your things, David said, his tone unwavering. If you cannot respect my mother in this house, then you cannot stay in this house. Sarah's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, then to frantic negotiation. David, this is insane. We've been married for 2 years. You can't just throw me out for one mistake. David shook his head, voice calm but firm. One mistake. This is not one mistake. This is the culmination of months of cruelty, lies, and disrespect. And tonight was the breaking point. Margaret, still wrapped in her blanket, looked at David with a mixture of sorrow and relief. You don't have to fight for me, David, she whispered softly. I can leave if it will stop the conflict. David placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. No, Mom. This is your home. You belong here. Sarah, you made your choice. Now you must face the consequences. Sarah's tears flowed freely, but these were tears of anger, not remorse. Fine, she spat. If that's how you want it. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. David's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. I already know what I almost lost, my mother's trust and love, and I will never allow anyone to jeopardize that again. As he walked toward the front door with the suitcases, the cold night air rushed in, filling the house with a stark reminder of the reality Sarah had created for Margaret. Just hours ago, Sarah followed, her last glance at the house filled with disbelief and fear. Margaret watched silently from the doorway, a complex mix of sadness and relief in her eyes. For the first time that night, she could breathe a little easier, knowing her son had finally stood up for her, finally protected her. And as Sarah loaded the suitcases into her car, the weight of her actions began to settle in, bringing a reckoning that she would never forget. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, staring at the house she had called home for 2 years. The cool night air of November seemed to seep through her pores, matching the chill she felt deep inside. For the first time, she fully understood the weight of her actions, the humiliation she had inflicted on Margaret, the woman who had given everything for David, the woman she was supposed to respect and love. But realizing the truth didn't undo what she had done. Inside the house, Margaret slowly rose from the couch, her legs still stiff from hours in the cold. David had gone back inside after putting Sarah's suitcases at the door, leaving Margaret with the quiet warmth of the living room. The blanket around her shoulders offered some comfort, but it could not shield her from the emotional toll of the night. Tears still lingered in her eyes, not just from fear and cold, but from the sheer relief of knowing her son had finally defended her. David sat next to her, his voice soft now, tinged with sorrow. "Mom, I can't believe this happened. I should have come home sooner, but I had no idea." He trailed off, his words failing him for a moment. He reached out and held her hands, feeling the trembling that lingered in her fingers. Margaret smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "It's not your fault, David. You couldn't have known. But what matters is that you're here now, and you've shown me, finally, that you would stand up for me. That means everything." David's voice grew firmer. "I can't let anyone, not even Sarah, treat you like that. Not in my home, not in my life. You deserve respect, Mom, always." Margaret leaned back slightly, her eyes scanning the warm room, finally settling on the soft glow of the lights, the familiar comfort of her home. She took a deep breath. "I just wanted to live peacefully. I wanted to help sometimes, to feel like I belonged. That's all I ever wanted." Meanwhile, outside, Sarah's panic was growing. Her hands trembled as she started the car, trying to figure out what she would say to her parents when she arrived. Every scenario in her mind was worse than the last. She knew the truth of her actions would be hard to justify, and there was no excuse she could offer that would erase the cruelty she had displayed. The tears she had shed earlier were now mixed with fear, anger, and a desperate sense of helplessness. Inside, David had moved toward the kitchen, preparing tea for his mother. The kettle whistled softly, filling the room with warmth and the comforting sound of domestic normalcy. Margaret watched him, a soft smile playing on her lips. It was a rare moment of calm after the storm, a moment where she could finally feel safe and cared for. When David returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, he handed one to Margaret. "Here, Mom, drink slowly. You need to warm up after being outside for so long." Margaret took a careful sip, the warmth spreading through her chest, easing both the physical cold and the emotional chill she had endured. From the living room, David noticed that Sarah's car headlights had disappeared down the street. He knew she had reached her parents' house by now, and that she would have to face the consequences of her actions outside of this home. He felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger, relief that his mother was safe, and anger at the audacity and selfishness Sarah had displayed. Margaret broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "David, what will happen now? Is this the end? David shook his head. I don't know, Mom, but one thing is certain: I will never allow anyone to treat you that way again. This house, our family, it starts and ends with respect. If someone can't respect you, they can't be part of our lives. Margaret nodded, taking another sip of tea. I'm proud of you, David. Proud that you finally saw the truth and acted. I've waited for this for so long. I've always believed that one day you would stand up for me, and tonight you did. David smiled faintly, though a shadow of sadness lingered in his eyes. It shouldn't have taken this for me to act, Mom. I should have seen it earlier. But tonight, I can't change the past. I can only protect the future. In the quiet of the living room, Margaret's eyes wandered to the neat arrangement of furniture and the familiar decorations. They were all tokens of a home she had built a life in, a home she had always loved. But she knew that the true value of the house was not in the furniture or the decor. It was in the people within it, in the care, love, and respect they showed each other. And tonight had been a reminder of just how fragile that respect could be as the minutes passed. David and Margaret settled into a comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional clink of the teacup. Outside, the cold November night stretched endlessly, mirroring the distance that had grown between David and Sarah. Each mile Sarah drove to her parents' home took her further from the life she had once known, a life that now seemed like a fragile illusion built on deception. Margaret finally spoke again, her voice soft but filled with determination. David, promise me something. Promise me that no one ever will make me feel like that again, that no one will treat me like I'm less than human. David held her hands tightly, meeting her gaze with unwavering sincerity. I promise, Mom. I swear it. No one will ever hurt you like that again. Not in this house, not in my life. The storm outside may have raged silently, but inside, a sense of peace began to settle. Margaret knew that the night had been difficult, even traumatic, but she also knew that her son had finally taken a stand. And in that moment, she felt a deep sense of relief, a hope that this home, her family, and the respect she deserved would remain intact. Meanwhile, somewhere down the quiet streets, Sarah's car wound its way toward her parents' house. She felt the weight of her actions pressing on her chest. For the first time, she realized that her selfishness had consequences far beyond her control. The anger she had felt at her mother-in-law's habits was nothing compared to the betrayal she had inflicted, and the reality of her situation, the fact that she had been removed from the home she had claimed as her own, was only beginning to sink in. By the time she arrived at her parents' home, Sarah was trembling, her heart pounding with anxiety. She stepped out of the car, her mind racing, knowing that she would have to explain herself. And yet, she also knew there was no easy explanation. The truth was unshakable, undeniable, and it would follow her wherever she went. Back in the warm glow of the living room, David and Margaret shared a quiet moment of connection. The tea had warmed their bodies, but the knowledge that justice had been done, the protection of family, the affirmation of love and respect warmed their hearts even more. And while the night was far from over, and many conversations were yet to be had, one thing was clear: the balance of this household had shifted forever. Respect had been restored, cruelty had been confronted, and the bonds of family had been defended in the most important way possible. The streets were silent as Sarah's car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind the house that had once been her sanctuary. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, heavier than any physical burden she had ever carried. For the first time, she realized that comfort and beauty meant nothing without respect, compassion, and gratitude. She had lost the trust of the one person who had truly loved her in this world, Margaret, her mother-in-law, and there was no easy way to regain it. Back inside, David closed the front door behind him, the sound echoing like a final punctuation mark. He turned to see Margaret settled comfortably on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, her face pale but calm. For the first time that night, a true sense of peace filled the room. It wasn't just the warmth of the house, it was the knowledge that the injustice had ended, that cruelty had been confronted, and that Margaret's dignity had been defended. David sat down next to her and took her hands in his. "Mom, are you okay now?" "Really?" he asked gently. Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. But this time they were tears of relief. I am, David. Thanks to you. Tonight, I finally feel safe again in my own home, and that means more to me than you'll ever know. David's expression softened as he held her hands a little tighter. I should have acted sooner, Mom. I should have realized what was happening behind my back. But tonight I know I did the right thing, and I promise you, no one will ever treat you like that again. Margaret smiled faintly, a sense of calm washing over her. You've given me more than safety tonight, David. You've given me respect, and that's priceless. The hours passed quietly, the cold November night slowly giving way to the soft promise of dawn. David and Margaret shared tea and conversation, recounting memories and talking about small, joyful moments that had nothing to do with the pain of the night. It was as if the darkness that had loomed over their home had finally lifted, leaving only light and a quiet warmth of family bonds renewed. Meanwhile, at her parents' house, Sarah sat on the edge of a couch, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her parents had questioned her repeatedly about what had happened, and she had no choice but to tell the truth. Each word was like a weight pressing down on her chest, the way she had humiliated Margaret, the lies she had told, and the cruelty she had inflicted. Her parents listened, their expressions a mixture of shock and disappointment. It was clear that they could not justify her behavior, and there was no easy explanation that could erase the truth. As the night gave way to morning, Sarah finally understood the full impact of her actions. She realized that comfort, luxury, and appearances were meaningless if one treated others with disrespect. She had been given everything: a warm home, a loving husband, and a mother-in-law who had only ever wanted to help, but she had squandered it all in a few selfish, cruel hours. Back at home, David and Margaret were beginning the day with a sense of normalcy and calm that had seemed impossible just hours before. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee, and sunlight began to filter through the windows. It was a simple, ordinary morning, but it carried extraordinary significance. The night's events had redefined their household. Respect and love were no longer optional. They were the foundation of their lives. Margaret looked around the room, taking in the familiar objects that now felt more precious than ever. David, she said softly, I never wanted conflict. I never wanted anyone to be hurt. All I ever wanted was a peaceful home and to be part of our family. David nodded, a soft smile on his face. And now you are, Mom. You are fully part of this family, and anyone who cannot respect that doesn't belong here. They shared a quiet moment, a deep understanding passing between them. The house was no longer just a structure of walls and furniture. It was a home built on principles, love and mutual respect. Margaret felt a profound relief, knowing that David had finally drawn a line that could never be crossed again. As for Sarah, the consequences of her actions extended far beyond a single night. Her parents had insisted she reflect on what she had done and how she had treated Margaret. The loss of her home and the trust of her husband served as a powerful lesson. She realized that respect and kindness could not be forced, bought, or faked. They had to be genuine. And without those qualities, comfort and luxury meant nothing. In the weeks that followed, David and Margaret rebuilt the quiet rhythm of their lives. Meals were shared, conversations were honest, and laughter returned to the living room. The bond between mother and son grew even stronger, fortified by the challenges they had faced together. Margaret no longer feared being ignored or mistreated, and David knew that his mother could finally live in peace. And as for Sarah, she remained a figure outside their home, left to contemplate the decisions that had led her there. The life she had known, the comfort she had taken for granted, was gone. The experience served as an indelible reminder that cruelty, lies, and disrespect could have immediate and irreversible consequences. David never looked back with regret. He had chosen family, loyalty and love over deception and selfishness. And Margaret, finally secure in the home she had helped build, could live her days with dignity, warmth, and the unwavering knowledge that she would never again be forced to endure humiliation in her own house. The house on that quiet street, once the scene of betrayal and cruelty, had been restored not just physically but emotionally. It now stood as a testament to love, respect, and the unbreakable bond between her mother and her son. And while the night had been long and painful, it had brought clarity and strength, proving that standing up for what is right can heal wounds and restore the heart of a family. In the end, the cold night had passed, but the lessons remained. Cruelty will always face consequences. Respect is earned through action, and the bonds of family, once truly honored, are unshakable. And for David and Margaret, their home was no longer just a place, it was a sanctuary, a haven where love, dignity, and respect reigned supreme.